Something unusual for me these past few months is that there was a high number of horror movies that I had watched. Well, the reason for that is because I was never a big fan of horror, but these past few months I watched 11 horror and horror-adjacent movies. After all of that, I must say, I'm still not a big fan of the genre. I'm not going to boycott it and say that all horror movies are bad, because that's just not the truth. It's simply that they didn't really appeal to me personally in the end. In fact, a lot of the ones in the middle, despite being really well received, really didn't appeal to me, and I actively disliked some of them. However, right when I was close to giving up on the genre, I watched Jordan Peele's Get Out, and now that may be one of my favorite movies ever, a large part of that coming from the protagonist, Chris Washington. To start, Get Out does an excellent job portraying who Chris is before the events of the film, something I sometimes find hard to say about horror movie protagonists. He's just a normal guy with a passion for photography and a dog named Sid. However, even before the horrors he encounters, it's clear that he has problems that he already deals with daily, and those problems can be summed up in one word: inaction. Get Out is a film rich with racial allegories, but there are some moments where, even aside from the allegories, it is blatantly clear just how defeated Chris is by the racism he faces. Some of the best examples come early on in the film, where the worst of his problems have yet to come. When his girlfriend, Rose Armitage, gets into a car accident and crashes into a deer, the police officer asks for his identification, even though he wasn't the one driving. And the sad part is that he's willing to simply comply, showing just how defeated he is. This sense of defeat is shown even further later on, when Chris is surrounded by the elderly guests of the Armitages, who assault him with questions about the African-American experience. It's painfully clear how uncomfortable he is with these queries, but he never says so out of fear of the repercussions. Even though these are things that should not stand, Chris simply complies. These are some of the clearest examples of Chris's fear to take action, and while it can be assumed that many moments like this over his life fortified his fear, the fear likely originated during the night his mother died when he was still just a kid. Decently early into the film, Chris begins to reflect on what was an otherwise normal night in his childhood, except for the fact that his mother wouldn't come home as she usually did. This disturbed the young child, and yet he did nothing. He continued to watch TV because, by his own admission, he feared that if he did call 911 for help, that would make the moment all real. Until then, though, he could just ignore it and ignorantly pretend that everything was fine. As expected, his mother was found dead from a car crash later on, but an even more distressing discovery was made when it was revealed that if help had come for her sooner, if Chris had gotten help for her sooner, she might have survived. There was no guarantee, but it was more than enough to scar Chris forever. When the Armitages finally enact their plan to have Chris's mind replaced with that of one of their elderly customers, however, there is no choice left for Chris except to act, or else he and countless others in the future would lose their free will forever. This is especially true when he learns that Rose was in on it the whole time, leaving him utterly alone. And in this do-or-die moment where the stakes were never higher, he acted. Not only did he find a way to escape from his captors, but he fought his way out and even killed all of the Armitages, because that's what he had to do. I think what's really telling about this decision is that, in the alternate ending where Chris is caught by the police and arrested, rather than being saved by his best friend Rod, he expresses no regret for taking action and saving himself and every other potential victim. While this may not be canon per se, it speaks volumes. The film was, in part, a story of Chris learning to stand up to injustice and fight for his own survival. And he did. Now, that would be a good ending point, but there's more to Chris that I like about him, still. While he is very closed off typically, his relationships with Rose and Rod really help build his character and how genuine they feel, at least from his perspective in the former. He doesn't hesitate to tell either of these people the concerns he has throughout the film. His scenes with Rose are moments where we can see him verbalize some of his thoughts and frustrations in a much more vulnerable way. And with his best friend Rod, you can tell just from how they talk to each other that Chris trusts him with his life. These both come to a head when Chris is absolutely devastated by Rose's true colors coming to the surface, and his relief when Rod comes to rescue him is palpable. On top of that, of all of the horror movie protagonists I was introduced to over the past few months, Chris by far feels the most proactive and well-realized. While he is indeed an inactive character overall at the start, he still sees that there's something wrong at the Armitage house, and tries to make small, unnoticeable steps to figuring out what's going on, which is exactly what I'd expect to see from someone like Chris personally. While he does try to avoid confrontation due to his nature, he's still not clueless and knows that he needs to get out. However, there's a fine line between being too dumb and too smart, and he expertly walks across it. He isn't simply suspicious of the Armitages as the plot needs, he is suspicious of them exactly when it makes sense. Every decision he makes in the entire film, both good and bad, make sense, and I respect that in a character so much. Last but not least, I'd like to draw attention to Daniel Kaluuya's performance as Chris. He delivers on every single emotion the character absolutely needs to show throughout the movie. Fear, sorrow, discomfort. All of it is shown through even just Kaluuya's facial expressions. The character and the film in its entirety would not be nearly as amazing without Kaluuya's nuanced performance.